So in the last video, we introduced Tiktaalik, a transitional form between amphibians and tetrapods. And we mentioned they had fish-like characters and tetrapod-like characters. And once again, the cool thing about this organism was scientists knew that there were amphibians that had evolved around this time, and there were fish that had evolved around this time. So they looked for rocks from the Devonian of the right habitat, freshwater environments. And they found a good site in Canada, and they looked there to see if they could find a transition between the two groups, and they did. Tiktaalik. That's the power of theory, scientific theory. It lets you make predictions and then go try to find evidence for that prediction, and it really worked out well. I'm going to put a video. I guess I can say it's optional because it's about an hour long, so I'm not going to say you have to watch it, but it's a really good video over Tiktaalik that'll help you to understand this more thoroughly. And there's actually a 3-part video series on this called Your Inner Fish, which I think is free to watch through PBS, so I might put them all up on Blackboard just so they're available for you. Okay, so now let's get to the tetrapod clade. This clade also includes us. These are animals, vertebrates with 4 limbs. We have a neck that allows separate movement of the head from the body, which is handy when you're on land. Ears for detecting airborne sounds, so vibration of the air instead of the water. A lot of us also have eyelids that can blink, which allow us to keep our eyes clean on land. So here's class Amphibia. So phylum Chordata, class Amphibia. So how are amphibians adapted to land? This is a question I would ask out loud in class, which is harder to do on video like this. How are they adapted to life on land? Well, they have legs. They have bones that support gravity. They have lungs and gas exchange through their skin. They have eyelids that can blink. These are all adaptations that allow them to live on land. How are they still tied to water? A lot of them still need to have moist skin so they can breathe through that skin. And they have external fertilization, just like a fish. The fish lay eggs in the water, and then the male squirts sperm over the top of them to fertilize them. Amphibians do the same thing. So they still lay their eggs in the water. Their eggs would dry out and die if they were laid on land. Legs, lungs, like I said, their lungs are not as complex as our lungs. They're not as much surface area, but they do work. They have cutaneous respiration as well, so they have to have moist skin with a little mucus on it to help keep it wet. And I already mentioned this in another lecture, but they also have a partially divided heart, so a 3-chambered heart that helps them to have a higher metabolism, because you need more energy to support your own weight to fight gravity. So when you're crawling around on land, it requires a different amount of energy than it requires to float around in the water. And eyelids to help keep their eyes clean, as I mentioned earlier, because it's dusty and dry on land. So think of all these adaptations these life forms had to evolve in order to be okay out of the water. It takes a lot of new traits. Here's an example of one of the coolest salamanders that can be found in Arkansas, a Hellbender. This is an amphibian, great big aquatic salamander, up to like 3 or 4 foot long. They're kind of rare because we've destroyed a lot of their habitat. But there you go, up to 1.5 meters long is how big they can get. That's amazing. So these are, like I said, are permanently aquatic. They don't come out of the water typically, and they're found in the Ozarks in some of our streams. Now reptiles are the next group that evolve. Reptiles are going to have a major adaptation that allows them to get away from water. Just like conifers were able to get away from water, unlike the ferns. Ferns still have swimming sperm and they're still tied to the water. Well, reptiles have adaptations that allow them to get further away from standing water, kind of like the conifers and angiosperms did. So reptiles. What allows them to live on land and make them more successful than amphibians? Well, can you tell me? This is a good time to ask yourself this. Well, let's talk about it, but you should be able to do this on your own as well. Like birds and mammals, this was the first group to evolve it. They have an amnion. This is a membranous sac in the egg that holds moisture and kind of protects the developing embryo. It's kind of like having a pond in the egg instead of the egg being laid in the pond. This is an adaptation to life on land. So now these organisms can lay their eggs on the land. They don't need to lay them in water. And they have leathery shells to help protect them, waterproof shells, and they have internal fertilization. So they no longer need water for sperm to reach egg. A lot of reptiles have hemipenes, which is kind of like a double-headed penis, and they have internal fertilization, and this allows fertilization to happen on land, and then the egg can be laid on land. There's no need to return to a standing body of water to have offspring. And of course, reptiles also have a thick, scaly skin full of keratin, kind of the same stuff that's in our skin. It's a waterproof layer that prevents dehydration. We didn't see that in the amphibians, but we see it in the reptiles. So here's an image of a reptile egg, or this could be a chicken egg. Same, but chickens are reptiles. We have extra embryonic membranes, meaning membranes outside of the embryo. So the amnion, as you see here, as you can read here, the amnion protects the embryo in a fluid-filled cavity. So it's kind of like having a pond around the embryo. Another membrane that you should be familiar with is the chorion. The chorion is a membrane that allows gas exchange to that embryo. So gases can get in through that shell, and then they can cross the chorion back and forth, allowing the embryo to get rid of CO2 and to get oxygen. The allantois, this is this membrane here. This is a sac that kind of stores waste, metabolic waste, so it doesn't poison the embryo. So it stores metabolic wastes. And then, of course, there's a yolk sac here that stores nutrients for the developing embryo. And another structure out here, this is not a membrane necessarily. The albumin is just protein. That's the egg white, basically. I won't test you on that right now. But you should be familiar with the allantois, the amnion, and the chorion as important membranes and what they do in the amniotic egg. This is a major evolutionary event in animals. So these shells allow eggs to be laid on land, and young can hatch out on land. They never need to be laid in a pond. So the reptiles include many groups, including various lizards, snakes, turtles, and crocodilians like this alligator. And then, of course, birds we now know are technically in this group as well, even though we often don't think of them as being reptiles. There's an example of a native reptile, the alligator snapping turtle. Don't put your finger in the mouth. The eastern fence lizard, or prairie lizard, I think is the species we have here in Arkansas. Very common organism that you'll see running around your house, outside your house, things like that. We have venomous snakes in Arkansas, like this copperhead. This is one that was actually captured in Arkansas. That was in a lab at Hendrix College. And cottonmouths. This is another native venomous species you should watch out for, especially around wet areas. Arkansas also has a few dinosaur tracks that have been found, all in kind of southwestern Arkansas. A lot of the rocks in Arkansas are Paleozoic in age, but we have a few Cretaceous age rocks, and there have been some dinosaur trackways found here in the state, which is pretty cool. So we know that dinosaurs, which were a group of reptiles, gave rise to the birds. So, think of like velociraptor kind of dinosaur giving rise to a chicken. Compare the skeletons there. They're very similar. The limbs have developed into wings in this case. But if you look at the feet of a chicken, they're still scaled. They still look like a dinosaur foot. The tail has been shortened, things like that. One thing I want to point out that's interesting, and you'll read about it in your book, is when you think about the evolution of flight in the birds, birds have to turn their arms into wings. They didn't evolve a new structure. But because of the segmentation of the arthropods and how each segment can develop specialized traits, they develop their wings from part of their outer covering. So they got to keep all their legs and add wings, which is pretty cool. So arthropods didn't have to give up their front legs or whatever, in order to have wings, but birds did, and bats also did have to give up arms in order to have wings. So birds are modified dinosaurs. They've lost their teeth. They don't have teeth anymore. That saves weight for flight. Feathers are derived scales. They're scales that have just changed their form a little bit. And they're endothermic. And dinosaurs may have been as well, but they're endothermic and they have a 4-chambered heart. So high metabolism, generate their own body heat, and they're insulated with feathers. And they have adaptations for flight, including a lack of teeth. And they have these keratin-rich feathers, which are similar to scales in a reptile. They have tons of surface area that help trap air and to insulate, as you can see here. And they also catch air that allow birds to more readily fly. Birds also have hollow bones, which saves weight, which is a great adaptation for flight. So a really cool group of organisms. All right, so we're going to pick up here in the next video. We're going to move from birds into the mammals.